Hello, today we are going to tell you about incredible women who, through courage and determination, became symbols of resilience and fortitude in the most difficult times of war. We will be transported back to the events of World War II, when Paris was liberated and women risked their lives protecting children, participating in guerrilla movements and saving thousands of lives on the front lines. We learn the stories of brave women who broke stereotypes by doing men's jobs in the military, medicine, and manufacturing, and those whose deeds and accomplishments remain an inspiration to this day. From war heroines to pioneers in sports and aviation, these women proved that there are no limits to willpower. Let's discover these amazing stories together. When Paris was liberated in August 1944, the city remained in a precarious position due to ongoing firefights between German soldiers, the resistance, and the Allies. During the public fighting, women of courage and resourcefulness sought to protect their children by sheltering them from the shelling. Images of mothers hiding their children behind the corners of buildings or sheltering behind barricades became a symbol of resilience in the face of war. Translated with dpel.com, free version. The story of Captain Nieves Fernandez, a Filipino guerrilla fighter, is an inspiring example of courage and resistance during World War II. Nieves Fernandez was a schoolteacher on the island of Leyte in Japan, but after the invasions, she took on the courageous role of guerrilla leader, defending her country's freedom. Fernandez assembled a group of fighters armed with mostly improvised weapons, such as knives and spears, which they made by hand. Her bravery and ingenuity made her a formidable foe for the Japanese invaders. Under her leadership, the guerrillas killed over 200 Japanese soldiers. She was not only a leader but also a strategist. Translated with dpel.com, free version. A Dutch woman refused to leave her husband, a German soldier, after his capture by Allied troops. She followed him into captivity, 1944. This story shows the power of love crossing the border of national battles and war. During World War II, when Allied forces captured German soldiers in the Netherlands in 1944, the wife of a German soldier, a Dutch woman, refused to leave him despite his role in the occupying army. She chose to follow him even when he was sent away as a prisoner of war. This was a rare display of loyalty in a war situation where relationships often soured due to enmity between nations. Translated with dpel.com, free version. Gertrude Ederle made history on August 6, 1926, by becoming the first woman to swim across the English Channel. She was 20 years old at the time. Ederle, an American swimmer and Olympic champion, covered the distance between the shores of France and England in 14 hours and 34 minutes. This result not only cemented her name in the World Chronicles, but also broke the previous record set by men. For Ederle, it was not just a sporting challenge, a fight for the right of women to be recognized in sport on an equal footing with men. Her swim was a real challenge. Cold water, severe storms, and erratic weather that made the English Channel one of the most challenging routes. But through perseverance, preparation, and the special mixtures of lanolin she applied to her skin to protect herself from the cold, Gertrude proved that the impossible was possible. Her triumph has been an inspiration to women around the world, demonstrating fortitude and determination. Amelia Earhart became a true aviation legend when she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in 1928. Although she was a passenger on this historic flight, pilot Wilmer Schultz and navigator Lewis Gordon flew with her. Her participation symbolized a new era for women in aviation. Earhart was chosen to fly not only because of her flying skills, but also as an inspirational image for the advancement of women in the male-dominated aviation industry. However, she didn't stop there. In 1932, Earhart repeated the feat on her own, becoming the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean alone in an airplane. The 1960s saw a significant social change in Afghanistan, and one of the most important advances in education was education for women. In 1962, Afghan women began actively studying medicine, which became a prerequisite for their participation in public life. This period came at a time of reform as the government under the leadership of President Zahir Shah sought to modernize the country. Medical education for women in Afghanistan was necessary to address the shortage of health workers, especially female doctors. In traditional Afghan society, many women preferred to see doctors of their own sex to examine women. Science classes and universities, including Kabul University, became places where women could study despite many cultural and social obstacles. These first steps toward equality in medicine not only changed women's personal lives, but also made an important contribution to the development of healthcare in Afghanistan. At the height of the Battle of Britain in 1940, when the German Air Force was actively bombing British cities, the country needed every possible resource for defense. During this period, an unusual role was taken on by the so-called Army of Moms, a group of women who began to be trained in the military. British sergeants and instructors, often World War I veterans, taught them skills such as handling, using self-defense tactics, and first aid. These women were part of the local Civil Protection Office, which enforced order. The iconic photograph of a pea picker, mother of 7 children, looking anxiously at an impending dust storm, 1936. This description relates to the iconic photograph Immigrant Mother, taken by photographer Dorothea Lange in 1936 during the Great Depression in the United States. The photograph captures Florence Owens Thompson, a mother of 7 children, a harvest worker, looking anxiously into the future, the reflections and despair of millions of Americans at that time. The picture was taken in a state where thousands of families affected by the economic crisis and devastating dust storms, the Dust Bowl, were looking for work and shelter. Thompson and her children lived in a camp for pea pickers where conditions were dire, lacking food, water, and the means to survive. Her gaze became a symbol of that time, capturing the pain, but also the hope for a better future. The Women's Liberation Coalition March in Detroit in 1970 was a highlight of the women's rights movement in the United States. It was a time when feminist organizations were actively fighting for gender equality, labor rights, reproductive freedom, and permanent membership. The march brought together hundreds of women and their allies, who marched through the streets of the city with placards, slogans, and calls for social justice. One of the main slogans of the movement was the demand for equal pay, as at the time women earned significantly less than men under the same conditions. The march also discussed rights to affordable education, protection from sexual harassment, and fighting stereotypes that limited women's role in society. This event was part of a wave of feminist protests across the country, forming the second wave of feminism. This story illustrates not only police work, but also the caring role of women in the most unexpected circumstances. In 1971, a Los Angeles policewoman became the heroine of touching scenes when she had to temporarily look after an infant who was in the station. The baby had been found abandoned, and while social services were searching for a suitable place for him to stay, the officer set up a makeshift cradle right in her desk drawer, placing a blanket underneath for the baby's comfort. A historic photo of girl snipers of the Soviet Third Shock Army, taken on May 4, 1945, symbolizes women's contribution to victory in World War II. The photo shows young Soviet girls who fought alongside the men. They participated in the approaching victory over Nazi Germany. Girl snipers epitomized not only combat stamina, but also incredible courage. Their service required exceptional endurance, precision, and the ability to act under stress. Despite the hardships of frontline life, they proved that women could be as professional and fearless in combat as their male comrades. A photo taken shortly before the end of the war was a reminder of their important role in liberating the world from fascism. Vienna in 1947 is still in a state of recovery from the devastation. The city was divided in the occupied zone between the Allies, USSR, USA, Great Britain, and France. People who had survived the war were trying to survive hunger, devastation, and loss. The return of prisoners of war who were released from camps across Europe gave hope to thousands of families, but also received much tragic news. Scenes like this one travel around the world. Mothers, wives, and children searching for their missing loved ones, clinging to every opportunity to learn something about them. These searches reflect the pain and longing to re-establish a family in a world trying to recover from the effects of war. Leola King made history as the first female officer to regulate traffic in the United States. In 1918, she opened her office in Washington, D.C., in the midst of a world war. Her emergence as a traffic regulator was not only a practical measure in the face of manpower shortages caused by the war, but was also a symbol of the changes taking place in society. In October 1956, when the uprising began, Erica, like many teenagers, joined the street fighting, risking her life for Hungary's independence. Despite her age, she showed the same determination as adults. The American nurses who landed in Normandy in 1944 were a reserve part of Operation Overlord, an effort to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation. They arrived shortly after the Allied troops landed to assist wounded soldiers on the battlefields. These women had incredible courage, working in constant danger, under shelling, in destroyed hospitals and on the front lines. Their dedication and assistance saved thousands of lives, and their service exemplified the heroism of women in wartime. In 1944, against the backdrop of World War II, American women took on many manufacturing and technical tasks, freeing up men to serve on the front lines. Among them were female employees of aircraft manufacturing companies such as Lockheed Corporation in Burbank, California. These women, often referred to as Rosie the Riveters, performed tasks that were once considered exclusively male: assembling, repairing, and inspecting machinery and weapon systems. The work was difficult and demanded precision, as pilots' lives depended on the quality of their labor. This touching scene takes place at the height of the World War in 1917, when fighting on the Western Front had reached horrific proportions. A Red Cross nurse sits beside a badly wounded British soldier and records his last words to his family. Red Cross nurses during this time not only played the role of medical professionals, but also became an emotional support for the dying. They worked under incredibly stressful conditions, facing the horrors of war every day. Moments like this one reminded them of humanity even in the cruelest of times, and the recorded words became the last link between fallen soldiers and their families. In the United States, women have become active in the military, including the Air Force, and have become part of important programs such as WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots, where they have flown various types of military aircraft, including B-17 bombers. These women not only flew the planes, but also performed many other tasks: deliveries, operational flights, and combat support. Despite their lack of combat involvement in most cases, they are the primary support on the front lines, believing that women can be just as brave as men in military aviation.